One species, the humpback whale, is rapidly becoming famous for the beautiful songs it sings. In spite of its humped back and the knobs on its face, it is really a very graceful creature. It has a happy personality and often leaps out of the water in sheer joy. The man who made these recordings is Dr. Roger Payne. As the animal is close to extinction, this was a remarkable achievement.
It's a fantastic animal, it really is. It's one of the most beautiful sounds in the world as far as I'm concerned. I never grow tired of it. I've listened to it for many, many years. Those are exactly the way those sounds would be if you were listening to them. They're not speeded up or slowed down or fiddled with in any way at all. They're exactly the way they'd occur naturally. The echo that you hear is because the whale's in very deep water, probably 1,500 feet about, and the water echoes coming off the bottom and then from the top. But there's something that's even better, which you miss and you can't hear from just this sort of a recording. The sounds go far lower, way, way down, so deep that you only feel them, you hardly hear them. There's another difference, which is that the volume you're hearing is very faint. If you heard it at full volume, it would just blow you right out of the room. These sounds have a pattern to them, and this pattern is repeated. These are actually tracings of spectrograms, and they show you some of the sounds made by whales. For instance, start at the beginning here. This whale starts by going sort of, and then the same thing again, another phrase, and on, changing slowly, sort of evolving its sounds as it goes, until after about 5 to 10 minutes of this sort of production, it comes to the head again, the start, and repeats the whole thing all over again. So that you see down here the whale doing exactly the same set of phrases. Now the important thing is, however, that in spite of this sort of constancy to the sound, there's also a good deal of variability from song to song. For instance, here you have a sort of whooping sound, whoop, that comes up from the bottom, followed by some very high shrieks. Again, the same thing in the second song with the same whale. When you slow these way down, you get rather fantastic variability to them.
The similarity of this to the slowing down of dolphin whistles is clear. They obviously serve some function of communication.
That means you really have to look at the song from two angles. What do the high frequencies mean? What do the low frequencies mean? I think there's sections addressed to two different audiences. One close, the high frequencies, which don't travel very far, and one a more distant audience, the lower frequencies, which go for tremendous distances. These sounds probably traveled for distances of 700 miles. It may announce the presence of one whale to the other, a message that translates, a whale is here.
So there's little doubt that whales and dolphins communicate socially, though not in the same way as man. However, they're much better at it than other animals, like dogs or even chimpanzees. So social studies amongst groups, like human sociology, should be possible. At SeaWorld in San Diego, California, trainers work with groups of dolphins in captivity. One of the trainers is Larry Clifford.
All the animals are divided into teams, and each team has its leader. And this is Cindy, and she's in charge of this group here. She's boss. And the way they prove this is by fighting, and whoever's the strongest, they roll. And once they establish this, then they fight until they are the leader. We have heard reports that these animals, they flock together when sharks are around, and they kill the sharks, and they stick together and they fight together. We've also heard reports that these animals have tried to save another dolphin that is drowning and bring it up to the surface, one dolphin on each side, and push it up. When a baby is being born, when a calf is being born, the mother always has another female with her, and in case any trouble, the other female helps her out. So we do have very high social order, and they're very intelligent.
But captivity is not a natural environment. In Hawaii, a team from the Oceanic Institute has been studying a group of dolphins in the wild. This is a type known as spinners, for obvious reasons. The man responsible for the study is Dr. Kenneth Norris.
I can see no evidence in the schools as a whole of any leader. And indeed, I have some evidence to the contrary, that none really exists. This is that when we see a school reverse, for example, the animals simply turn around, even though it may be over 2 miles of sea, and go the other direction. It isn't as if they were following a leader and going around behind an individual. In the subgroups, there is a dominance hierarchy often, where there will be a dominant animal, which may be an old female as well as an old male. Some of the old gals in the porpoise world are pretty tough customers. The nearest thing to a playtime comes a little after they wake up, when the animals begin to go to sea. These are chases where porpoises are nipping one another, they're rolling over in the water, there's a lot of sexual activity going on, a lot of vocalization. Porpoises, little baby ones, are practicing their spinning and this sort of thing. They sometimes will go on obliviously, jumping into the air and spinning until you almost run over them in the boat. And then they look up and say, "Oh, what's that thing?" and get out of there and leave.
They also take part in what seems a highly dangerous occupation known as bow riding.
And there have been a number of hydrodynamic studies which show that there is a pressure field at the bow of a ship. The animal comes along and, so to speak, puts his tail into this pressure field, and he's getting a free ride. And it must be a lot of fun. And the real question is, how did they learn to do this when they do it all around the world, and when ships have only been on the ocean for, what, 3,000 years maybe? And we used to puzzle about this until we finally found out that they ride the bows of big whales also. We've seen porpoises riding a humpback, and it looked to me as if the humpback didn't like it very well, but there wasn't anything he could do. These animals use sexual behavior as the sort of matrix of most of their social behavior. There's a tremendous lot of mating going on in a school which has no function as far as reproduction is concerned. And we'll see all kinds of groupings, all female groups, and we'll see sexual behavior between them. We'll see male-male groups and sexual behavior between them, and then heterosexual groups as well. So you get all of these combinations, which is one of the reasons we say that much of the sexual behavior has a social context rather than a reproductive context. We think that the hydrodynamic requirements of the animals have smoothed off their outside surfaces to the point where they don't have a lot of expression on the surface of their heads or anything. But it's very likely that they read one another's moods and so forth by echolocating into the other animal and looking at the air spaces, which do reflect the sound back very well, so that they may be expressing rage and fear and so forth internally, if you will, and reading it internally in each other.
The suggestion that dolphins indulge in an elementary form of mind reading supports the impression that they seem to be living in a utopian world in which there are no leaders, no inhibitions, no competition, and where life is free and lived for pure enjoyment. Maybe the same applies to the great whales. A large number of Californian gray whales assemble annually in one lagoon off Mexico. These barnacled leviathans gather together in groups and seem almost to frolic in the sun. Like the dolphins, sex play is unrestrained. This is a mating group of 3. But if scientists are going to investigate these animals more closely, one of them will have to be caught. This is Gigi, the only great whale in captivity. She lives in a series of interconnecting tanks and is looked after by a bevy of scientists and keepers. She's only 6 months old. In the tank with her are 2 fully grown dolphins for her to play with. At the moment, most of the water has been drained from this tank so that she can be fed. Dr. David Kenny is responsible for her.
She was a baby, a nursing baby, when we first caught her. And we had to raise her for about 5 to 6 months only on formula. And we devised this formula on the basis of walrus formulas that we've had before. And then we changed it according to the differences or changes in the blood chemistries that we've come upon during this time. And today, she weighs a little over 8,000 pounds and is almost 25 feet in length. So it gives you an idea of the rate of growth, which is fantastic. She's also eating over 1,000 pounds a day.
That's almost half a ton of food a day. The local squid fishermen are doing a roaring trade. She was very quick to learn to come over to her keeper and open her mouth for food. As soon as she settled down, research could begin. As she represents a totally unexplored field of science, any information, however basic, is of biological interest. Here she's having the size of her lungs measured by blowing into a balloon. Other experiments showed that she has a very high cholesterol level in her blood, high enough to give any other mammal a heart attack. Her skin, too, showed remarkable properties.
On the transport of her from Scammons Lagoon in Baja California to San Diego SeaWorld, we left a large rope underneath her, which we didn't know about, and it rubbed a large wound on her belly. It was about 2.5 feet long and about 18 inches wide, which now is completely healed. These animals seem to heal, number one, very rapidly, but number two, they heal without a scar. Now, there is still a slight scar there, but you can see evidence now that the normal pigmentation is coming through it, where within another 6 months, there will be no evidence whatsoever that she ever had a wound there. The importance of this, I think, is for this to stimulate some researchers into looking into the properties of healing and what causes this, and perhaps this can be put over towards the human being or any other animals.
The young animal has a huge amount of power in her body, and yet she is very gentle and almost cow-like. But unfortunately, she's growing very fast.
Well, eventually she'll be turned loose when she's really too big for our environment here. But right now she isn't, and of course you can see the larger tank out here that she can be turned into, and so she has quite a long while here before she would have to be turned loose.
Apart from the occasional scientist, man no longer pursues the great grey whale along the west coast of America where it lives. Its idyllic existence seems likely to continue. For other members of this intelligent and sociable species, the story is different. The modern whaling fleet is an armada of ships carrying out what amounts to a military operation. They use helicopters, radar, sonar, supply ships, factory ships, hospital ships, and killer birds. Their main weapon is an explosive harpoon fired from a cannon, which explodes like a hand grenade after it has entered the whale's body. A blue whale. The man who has made a special study of the species and what happened to it is Professor George Small.
Behind me is the model of a 92-foot blue whale. This species is the largest animal that has ever lived on the face of the earth. Its weight can surpass 200 tons, 4 times that of the largest dinosaur. And yet this magnificent mammal within the last 40 years has been pushed from a population of 150,000 to the verge, that horrible verge of biological extinction. In 1925, a Norwegian engineer invented a slipway on a factory ship, which made it possible for man to draw the carcass up on a factory ship, to there dismember it and to boil the oil, which meant that the whalers could operate on the high seas anywhere where they could locate the animal. And within 6 years after that, over 40 factory ships were operating with literally hundreds of killer boats armed with 90-millimeter cannon. In that 1 year alone, they killed almost 30,000 blue whales. And ever since that time, the annual kill, has far surpassed the production of the species itself.
Why do we need to kill whales? The entire whaling industry is worth £100 million a year. In fact, this is very small, much smaller, for example, than the peanut industry. But where do whale products go? Russia and Japan are the two big whaling nations, and some of it goes to those two countries for food. In fact, whale meat could supply a vast amount of protein food for undernourished nations, but it's not very popular. Although the Russian housewife still buys a lot, in Japan the taste for it is dying out. Every part of the animal is used. Practically nothing gets thrown away. From the baleen, we make brooms and brushes. Whalebone corsets have gone out of fashion. But the blubber and bones and oils extracted from the whales are used for an amazing range of products. From lipsticks, shampoos and other kinds of cosmetics, to shoe polish, floor polish, candles, toys, chess sets, handbags, shoe horns, margarine, soap, bicycle saddles, transmission oil, film emulsion, and even fertilizer.
The old argument that we need individual whale products is nonsense. There is not a single substance taken from whales for which there are not far more abundant synthetic or naturally occurring alternatives.
But there is one huge area where whale products are used extensively.
The pet food companies use the meat for dog and cat foods, principally. It's an interesting point. Just that very group of people who would be most outraged to discover that the food which they're feeding to their pets, their dogs and cats, that very group of people probably doesn't realize that it's subsidizing the overexploitation of whales.
By 1970, British cats and dogs alone accounted for 7% of the world's annual whale catch. There are two sides to the industry. It's the consumer demand that makes it economically possible for the whalers to catch so many whales. However, there is an organization which is designed to control whaling. After the Second World War, an international whaling commission was set up by the industry itself, drawing delegates from every nation involved in whaling. It came about largely because the blue whale, the backbone of the industry, was becoming extremely scarce. After the war, it became so hard to find that the member nations were banned from catching it. Though, if one was to find one and pop it in the bag, who's to know? Next, the industry turned to the most prolific whale, the finback, which sustained the industry for many years until it, too, ran into a rapid decline. It's not protected even to this day. Then came the much smaller sei whale. Not very numerous, it reached its peak and was decimated in a fairly short space of time. Now, today, it's the turn of the sperm whale. It's still found in large numbers all over the world, but already the size of the animals caught is beginning to decrease. Something is obviously wrong with the International Whaling Commission.
The problem is it hasn't got any teeth. It can't make anything stick. It can't enforce anything and have it last. For an example, let me read you something from the proceedings of the 17th meeting of the Commission. It was decided, quote, "It is forbidden to use a whale catcher attached to a factory ship for killing or attempting to kill sperm whales in the waters between 40 degrees south latitude and 40 degrees north latitude." Then it goes on to say, "This amendment of the schedule was objected to within the prescribed period by Norway, Japan, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. This paragraph was therefore not binding on these countries. But it also happens that Norway, Japan, and Russia are the only 3 countries on Earth hunting sperm whales in those latitudes, and therefore it is a completely meaningless decision. Does not mean a thing. Might as well never have been passed."
The International Whaling Commission stumbles along quite as ineffective as it has ever been. And until this situation changes, no valuable species of whale on the high seas is safe. And in my estimation, all commercial whaling should cease until man can devise an organization with the power to enforce its own regulations. And until that time happens, no whale is safe from extermination.
I'd like to see the markets for whales closed. In other words, for whale products closed. I'd like to see this begin just as it has begun in the United States, in other countries as well. The United States recently passed something called the Endangered Species Act. This puts all large whales onto a list which may not be imported into this country. Now, what that means is that if other countries wish to sell whales, they cannot sell them to the United States. Suppose other countries, for example, England and Germany and so on in Europe, were to stop the importation of whale products. This means that there is nothing that the industry can do about that. In other words, there is no way around that fact.
There's not much we could do for the giant panda or the buffalo, but the whales could be saved. We could close the markets for whale products with a simple piece of legislation. A bill preventing the import of whale products into Britain would cut the market by a further 10%. If the European countries followed the American lead, almost half the world market would have vanished. With such a hole in their economy, the whaling industry would find it impossible to continue. Not many of us will ever have seen a living whale, but because their level of intelligence is second only to our own, and because we are exterminating them, not casually or inadvertently, but knowingly and purposefully, the whales would seem to have a special claim on our help. The dolphin has been called a cousin to man, and we have developed a special affection for this animal. Their larger brothers, the great whales, we are killing off at the rate of 1 every 12 minutes. 1 whale every 12 minutes.